Hey, everybody. This is Michael Schroeder, and we're doing our first podcast here. Or what are we calling this? Are we calling this a podcast?
Bible study, YouTube.
A Bible
podcast.
study YouTube conversation.
Sure.
So we'll try to come up with a better name here. I'm not too sure.
Hey, it's good enough.
But this is Nathan Marlette, and we were talking. We've known each other for a really long time, and
at least like 3 months or something.
For longer than that. He likes to block out the original time in his mind, but
right.
I've known him for a long time, and he is brilliant, even in spite of that comment. He is brilliant in his own right, and but we'll have these conversations, and he'll call me with these really deep biblical topics, and we'll discuss them. But he's also more technology technologically savvy. That's what I was trying to say. Than I am. And so I told him that I was interested in doing recording some of my Bible studies that I've done, and he graciously volunteered to help me out. So I've been doing...
I volunteered as tribute. Yeah, like they said in the Hunger Games.
Yeah, that's right.
Volunteered as tribute.
Which he may regret before this is over. We'll see. Hopefully not. But I've been doing Bible studies for a long time, and the Bible study that I'm really jazzed about right now is the Tabernacle. So we're going to record some of these conversations about the Tabernacle. But Nathan, is there anything you want to volunteer about yourself? Any information?
No, just I would echo. I've known Michael for a really long time, and I know his heart for ministry and for serving the kingdom of God. So I'm excited to help out with getting some of the stuff that's in his genius brain out into the world. And I look forward to maybe pushing him a little bit, maybe asking some questions where I don't understand and seeing what he can share with me. So I'm looking forward to it.
And my goal is for this to be real conversational. So we want everybody to get as much out of it as they can. And I think Nathan will help to flesh it out so that we can really get some good content on the table. Absolutely. And he's going to try to help me keep it like practical for everyone too, I think, because so that I don't just drift off into obscure land.
It can happen. So it's all good.
It certainly can. So what I wanted to do is start off with this conversation about the Tabernacle. And part of the reason we're studying this is when somebody starts reading the Bible, you start reading through Genesis and Exodus, and there's all these stories, and there's this drama, and there's a lot going on. And then where you hit a roadblock is when you get into the middle of Exodus, and God starts dropping these laws on Moses, and then he goes into these blueprints for a tent, and he's talking about tent materials, and he's talking about dimensions, and all this different kind of, and especially like if you're reading out of the King James Version or something, we don't even know these measurements, so like cubits and things like that.
It's unreadable.
But
unreadable, totally unreadable.
Yeah, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe I can get through these 20 chapters of Exodus and move on. And it just keeps going and going. And after he tells them how to build it, then he tells us how they built it, So we have the instructions, and then we have the execution of it. Yeah. And so it's rough. It's rough reading. I'm not going to lie. It's one of the most boring parts of the Bible. And then you get into Leviticus, and that's usually where people's Bible reading plans die a painful death right at the beginning of the year. And very tragic, very tragic. I don't want that to happen. But my philosophy for looking deeper into some of those dimensions and some of those materials is based out of 2 Timothy 3:16. And what that says is that all scripture is given by the inspiration of God, and it's profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction in righteousness. And so I really believe that no detail in the Bible is recorded without purpose. And when Paul wrote that, he's referencing the Old Testament, right? And he talks about how the Old Testament is a schoolmaster that's leading us to Jesus. And so so I really believe every detail is in there for a reason and has instruction for us. It says all scripture is profitable for doctrine, which is like teaching, for reproof, for correction. And you're looking at it, you're like, how is a covering of goat's hair?
It definitely seems like a tough sell. Like I'm open, but sell me.
Well, yes, that's what I'm going to try to do. That's what these Bible studies are going to try to accomplish. And if I can't convince Nathan, we're just going to delete these off of YouTube, and we're going to go home. We're already at home, I guess. But so we're going to see. We're going to see if I can sell you on it. But I really believe there's some instruction to get out of it, and I'll explain why. And so what I thought we could do this first one is put the tabernacle in its like larger biblical story context. Like, what is a tabernacle, and why was it even? Why did God spend so much time on it? Because he spends like 12 chapters on Abraham, and then, like I said, there's like 40 chapters on the tabernacle. So it seems to be important to God, but why was it so important? So let's take a look.
Show me the way.
All right. So the way, we're going to start right back at the very beginning of the Bible, and I'm going to put this into the frame by which I understand all the rest of the Bible, right? So for me, when I look at the Bible, I see it as God wanting to have a relationship with the people that he's created, and that relationship's been disrupted because of sin. And that's what the whole story of the Bible is about to me. So at the beginning of the Bible, the way it opens up, very familiar to most people. God creates the heavens and the earth, and the earth starts off, it's without form, it's void, darkness is on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God comes in. Order is brought out of disorder, right? There's creation that's brought out of this chaos. And so God structures everything, and you read the first 2 chapters, and he starts with, and there's a 6-day structure, right, that he provides, talking about how everything is created, and there's the light, and the waters are divided, and then the plants, and then he starts creating the animals, and on the last day he creates humans, and he creates humankind in his own image, and then he gives them dominion. And so suddenly we have this world, and humans have dominion, and they're partnering with God over creation. But we don't get too far into the story before things things take a turn downhill, right? And humans disobey God, and they are kicked out of this garden that he created for them. And when you're reading about the garden, we don't have too much about the perfection that was there, right? And the ideal place that they were in, but you see things are provided for them, right? Man is there tilling the ground and stuff, but he's there tending to it. He's there tending to the garden. But like, God creates trees that are yielding fruit, and there's a mist, dew that comes up and waters everything in the garden. They have everything they need. They just have one limitation, and it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He says, don't eat from it, or there will be death. When they do eat from it, he banishes them from the garden. So did you have a comment? Jump in.
No. I don't have a comment. I'm going to be taking some notes, so if I'm looking down, looking away, keep going. Don't let me distract you. But I'm going to be trying to, get my thoughts down. So
yeah. You might have to interrupt me and be like, all right, Michael, people are getting lost and they're getting bored.
It's all good. I'll jump in.
Okay. So once, and you see something interesting in the garden, you see God is communicating with the humans that are in the garden. And once they disobey, the Bible says that they hide, and they hear the voice of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they're afraid. God speaks to them, and they realize that they are uncovered, they're exposed, they're vulnerable, they're naked, and they start by blaming each other. And but the end result is that they have to leave this place, this ideal place where they had this perfect communion with God. And I wanted to read a couple verses, and you're like, what does this have to do with the tabernacle? We're getting there.
That is what I'm asking. Like, this is great.
Right.
Like, link me. Like,
yeah. So the whole point of the beginning, where they're in the garden and they're in this ideal relationship with God, it's been disrupted. Okay. And in the garden, there's the tree of life. So there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there's the tree of life. And the Lord actually says, when man is leaving the garden, man and woman are leaving the garden, and he says, lest he put forth his hand and take of the tree of life and eat and live forever, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. He drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life.
Wait, sorry. What's a cherubim?
Great question. Because this is the first time this word pops up. It pops up in the Bible, and it's out of the blue, and we don't even get a description of these things until the book of Ezekiel.
These things,
they're crazy looking.
Okay.
And that's one of the weirdest chapters in the Bible too. So I have a whole lesson to discuss the cherubim, but what I want to just create this like mysterious thing. There's these creatures that are placed at the garden, and their purpose is to keep man out, right? Sure. There's cherubims, and there's a flaming sword. And so we could go as far as to say these are angelic beings. They're spiritual beings that are there to guard the garden, to keep the way of the tree of life.
Is this like a flaming sword? Is this symbolic at all, or is this literal, or like does it even, for the purposes of understanding the tabernacle, does it really matter to even ask these questions? I mean, the questions of literal versus metaphorical, I guess, would go beyond just the flaming sword. I know there's a lot of debate within our culture, within Christianity. The first chapter of Genesis that you referenced, is that all metaphorical or poetic, or is that a literal account? I guess without getting into the weeds, you said that these chapters frame how you view like the whole story of the Bible, and then specifically, obviously, the tabernacle. If that's your foundation, does it matter a whole lot for our discussion whether you take that literally or figuratively, or will the kind of the message we're going to be driving at function whether or not the sword is literal or metaphorical, and the days are literal days, metaphorical days, and all that stuff? Like how thoroughly do we need to examine that issue before we build on the foundation, or is it not that important to move forward?
Yeah. And like I obviously have an opinion of whether it's literal or metaphorical, but for the purpose of the tabernacle, it really doesn't make a difference as long as we understand the principles that it's laying out, right?
Okay.
Because the tabernacle is going to use a lot of symbolism that draws on these first couple chapters of Genesis.
So whether it's symbolism drawing from symbolism or symbolism drawing from literal, it doesn't matter. We're ending up in symbolism.
Right. Okay. We want to at least get the ideas in our head so that we know what it's referencing back to when we get there. And so just like with the cherubims, the first time we see cherubims pop up without even really an explanation of where they came from or what they are at this point, right? Like if you're reading the Bible brand new and you don't know anything about Christianity or religion or Judaism or anything, you're going to come across this word and you're going to be like, all right, I have no idea what that is. You know, maybe you'll look it up in a dictionary or something, but the Bible doesn't define it as it goes. It just drops the concept but it builds on it later on, you know, which I think is fascinating. And so with the cherubims in particular, when you come into the tabernacle, when you come to the door, there's cherubims that are engraved, it says, on the curtains that make up the door. And as you get further in, they're on the walls, and then they're at the veil that separates the holiest place from the other holy place, right? And so there's something with cherubims that has to do with the presence of God, but also has to do with our separation from the presence of God. And I'm deriving that just even from this one verse. When man is separated from this ideal place where the presence of God, they have full access to the presence of God, perfect communion with the presence of God. Now suddenly something's disrupted that. Sin has disrupted that. And what we see as a barrier to them entering into that location is cherubims. And the flaming sword is, if I see a flaming sword when I'm about to walk into a place, whether it's held by a cherubim or it's funny because it doesn't really say it's held by the cherubims. Like there's some cherubims and there's a flaming sword that's turning every direction.
This could be completely different things going on here.
Yeah, it could be. And the point is like a keep out. The flaming sword's a keep out sign, right?
So the point of all this, the cherubims, the sword, all of this, man has sinned. There's a separation, and these are very clear markers of separation.
Exactly.
That get repeated later whenever we get to the tabernacle, marking you're getting close to paradise or Eden, or you're getting close to this presence of God. But there's also a separation there. It's supposed to. Okay, so keep driving me towards deeper into Genesis and Exodus and into the rough stuff. We're
heading that direction. And so and specifically before we move on from this, it's keeping them from the tree of life, right? So there's this indication that there is life available to them, that was available to them until their sin, but now there's a separation from that life. There's life that they're not benefiting from. And we'll see that, and as you keep going through Genesis, the very next story, you see Adam and Eve's sons bringing offerings before the Lord. And then there's a jealousy and there's things that happen. And one son murders the other son. And and death enters the world for the human race. And even though in the genealogies, as you're reading through, they're living for these super long times, but they're dying. There's death that's coming about after they've exited the garden. So as we're going through this, there's this indication that something is broken with the world, right? There's something that's wrong. It's not operating the way that God intended it. And it brings that point up fairly quickly in the narrative with the world becomes so corrupt, it says, and so full of violence that God says, I'm going to destroy the world with a flood, right? And most people have some knowledge of the story of the ark, Noah's ark, and the flood. But you see judgment coming on the world, but God spares one family, and he has a place for them. And what's interesting is that they're in this safe place that brings them through the flood. They have this communion with the animals, much like Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden, right? All the animals are there on the ark. They come through the flood. They come into this new creation, and God is establishing, his relationship with this family. And then again, the world starts to become more and more corrupt. God says, I see that man's heart is evil continually from his youth. And man binds together in this rebellion. In Genesis chapter 11, they're building a tower. They're doing it apart from God. And God scatters them over the face of the earth. And then he chooses one family, the family of a man named Abraham, that he's going to use as his vehicle to reach the rest of the world. And yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let me stop you there. Let me make sure, because that seems like a big
statement.
Yeah, big statement. Okay, so it seems like that's a strategy change on God's part. So correct me if I'm. So let me see if I've got the whole story right up until this point in time.
Okay.
So God creates man, creates the rest of creation while he's at it. Obviously, creates everything. Everything's functioning as it should. God has a relationship with man and the rest of his creation, but man particularly in this space called Eden. In Eden, they have access to God's presence and to the tree of life. Mankind chooses to disobey God's rules and kind of seize control of what for themselves, which ends up being a bad move. God is grieved, tells them, it's not game over, but there's definitely going to be lasting consequences. You're going to die, and there's going to be continual separation. He puts these symbols of separation, which are this flaming sword and these cherubim figures that are clear markers of separation. Mankind then goes out into the world and does what mankind does, gets crazy. People start killing each other. Societies evolve and begin to unravel. God eventually sees that it's become so bad that not only is it enough to keep them separate, he feels the need to do basically like a hard reset on the whole experiment. And so he sends the flood, preserves one family. Basically, I'm going to eliminate the rest of the world and save one family and try to restart over. But that doesn't work because even that one family that started off good, they also, as they rebuild society, become corrupt again. So then God says, what you just said, he chooses the family of Abraham. So God is now choosing a different strategy, saying instead of wiping out the rest of the world and starting with a family, I'm going to start with one family and use them to spread my presence to the rest of the world. Like instead of continually eliminating people and resetting it, I'm going to use the good people to infect the good people. Yeah. So I'll start here basically. And is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fair. Yeah. Okay. Because man's decision, right? When they take of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's a decision that we're deciding. God already told us to not eat of this tree, but we're taking matters into our own hands. We're going to be the deciders of what's good and what's evil, what's right and what's wrong, right? Sure. And so that plays out throughout the rest of the biblical story. And we see these themes of, are the people going to listen to God and trust him, or are they going to choose their own path? Are they going to choose to define their morality? Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Even the thing that the serpent says when he's tempting Eve is, you will be as gods, knowing good and evil, right? There's this desire that we're going to rule our own life. We're not going to listen to the creator. We're going to do things the way, but we see how that always unravels. That always ends up in a bad place. Even in those first 11 chapters, that's clearly to me, like what the story's driving at, what it's showing us. Okay. And so with this strategy that you're talking about, so he's God created all of these, he created mankind, and mankind is, splintered off into these family groups. And then when he calls this man Abram at the beginning, the Lord gives him a promise, and he speaks to him and he says, I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee. I will curse them that curse thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. And that's where I'm driving, that he's going to use this family he's not just choosing out this family and saying, you're the only ones now, forget about the rest of the world. I'm just going to focus on you. He's choosing the family so that the rest of the families of the earth are going to be blessed as a result of what he does in this family.
Okay. So then it's the family of Abraham that eventually, as it grows, becomes the nation of Israel, correct?
Correct. Right.
So now when we get to and pardon me if I'm jumping ahead. Trying to make connections.
Yeah.
We get to the tabernacle, and you said the tabernacle, just so I'm clear, was this tent that they had in the middle of the nation of Israel, this tent where you could encounter God in this tent. Something about the tabernacle is tied to the purpose of Israel as a nation in general. Like you're supposed to be a kingdom, or not kingdom, you're supposed to be a nation that reaches out and spreads the kingdom of God to the rest of the world. So that mission of Israel, is it somehow tied to this tabernacle that's placed at the center of Israel?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
it's crucial. It's crucial to this mission, right? This is because, and we know that it's important to God because he spends so much time on it with them, right? So the family of Abraham that grows and multiplies and it becomes the nation of Israel, they end up as slaves in Egypt, right? And God delivers them out of slavery in Egypt. He delivers them out of bondage, and he says, I'm going to make of you a great nation, right? And
like he promised Abraham.
Yeah, that he promised Abraham. And so as he brings them out of Egypt, the guy that he sent to bring him out of Egypt is named Moses. Okay. And Moses, when he encounters God, he encounters him as he's taking care of sheep, and up on this mountain, he sees a burning bush. The bush is burning. It's not being consumed. He goes to see what it is. And God speaks to him out of the bush and tells him that he's going to use him to deliver this family of Abraham that he's called. And he tells him that the sign will be that Moses will bring them back to that mountain where he appeared to him the first time, so that they can worship God there. Okay. So Moses, he goes to Egypt. All these crazy things happen. God delivers them out of Egypt. He brings them out. He parts the Red Sea. For those of you watching, if you don't know this story, read Exodus and it's super cool. But I think most people that are going to watch this are pretty familiar with that. So I'm jumping over it. But the main point is that he brings them out of Egypt, and he brings them to the same mountain where he spoke to Moses the first time in the burning bush. But you see something interesting, when Adam and Eve they're banished from the garden, there's a flaming sword, right? And then Moses, he sees a flaming bush and he's scared and he runs from it, and God calls him to him out of it. And they get to the mountain, and that's where I want to pick up with what you said about him making this nation to fulfill what he said he was going to do with Abraham. He speaks that really clearly once they get to the mountain in Exodus chapter 19. And so
so just so I'm clear, he calls Abraham, and same guy, tells him, eventually through you, there's a great nation is going to come. Your kids and your kids' kids is going to become a great society. The purpose of this society that's going to come through your line is going to be to basically have my presence or my kingdom flow through them to the rest of the world, to be a blessing to all of them. Assuming that this also ties back to Genesis, they're going to be a blessing to kind of bring them back to where humanity kind of fell away from. All right, so Abraham knows this promise, dies. Hundreds of years later, the nation, all of his kids have formed that nation, and God's now getting ready to pull off what he promised Abraham generations ago, and says the exact same thing. Basically, like checks back in and gives the same thing at the mountain where Moses originally encountered God. So they're
and
kind of
this
back
time.
at this place. Okay.
Right. What's crazy about this time, because you see this beautiful relationship between Abraham and God. God speaks to Abraham, and Abraham speaks with God, and there's promises, and there's all these things. And then he speaks to Abraham's son Isaac. He speaks to Abraham's son Jacob. And then those kids end up in slavery in Egypt, and as they're multiplying. They're not really a nation yet. They're just the descendants of this guy Abraham who have multiplied, and specifically of his grandson Jacob, who have multiplied in this foreign land in bondage. But God so they've heard these promises. These promises have been passed down, and God says, all right, now I'm going to fulfill it. And what's crazy about this particular instance, he brings them all to the base of the mountain, and he's going to speak to the whole group of people, not just to one guy. It's not just going to be to Moses. He's going to establish a covenant. And this is Israel as a nation. They're receiving an offer from God in a sense. He's like, I want to make you into this nation that I promised Abraham. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to form a covenant together.
What's a covenant? What's a covenant?
So a covenant is like, it's a deal, it's a contract, it's an agreement, it's a, you might even have a better definition, because it's even more than we would like. We probably treat the idea of like contracts and stuff a little more lightly than they would treat the idea of covenants.
So some closer to like a marriage vow or something like that?
Right, exactly, yeah. So that's the best example of a covenant in our day and age, because it's an eternal thing. It's everybody's, people are saying vows on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And then like a business contract, there's loopholes where one party or whatever can exit. But it really is like a marriage covenant. And even there's some kind of cool parallels with like the Jewish wedding ceremony and what happens with God and the nation of Israel on Mount Sinai.
Cool. But all right, so for right now, covenant it's like a super, super serious relationship that's formal, agreed upon on both sides, a lot of ceremony, a lot of emotional weight behind it. Not very, very much not boring, dry, like
this is huge. Yeah. This is huge.
Okay.
Because it's a brand new nation that's forming,
So God calls the nation of Israel back to that mountain that Moses was on, and says the same promise that he said to Abraham to Israel in the form of a covenant. So what happens? Keep going.
Yeah. And the unspoken question is, you're reading through once you read about Abraham, and then you're reading through the rest of the story, and you see these promises. And by the time you've gotten to this place in Exodus, the question is, so how we see how God's working, how is he going to do this thing that he promised to Abraham, right? How is this going to play out? How's it going to happen? So God brings them to the base of this mountain. And in Exodus 19, it talks about, this is in the 3rd month that they've come out of Egypt. They're in the wilderness of Sinai. They're camped there. And Moses, they come to this mountain. This was the goal. This is what they were going to. Moses told them, we're going to go to this mountain out in the desert so that God can form this covenant with you. And so Moses goes up to God, and God speaks to him out of the mountain and tells them, and I'm going to read these scriptures. It's 3 verses in Exodus 19, 4-6. And it's where he's telling them what his goal for them is. And it's similar to the Abrahamic language.
So this is God saying his part of the covenant.
Right. This is him saying what the goal of the covenant is, what he wants to do with the people.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
So he says, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bear you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to myself. And you can even see the relationship language there too. I brought you to myself, right? And he says, now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. So he's saying, Israel, out of all the people on the earth, I'm setting you apart for a special purpose, a peculiar treasure. And for all the earth is mine. I'm in charge of the whole earth. I created it, but I'm going to choose you out for a special purpose. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And these are the words that I want you to speak to the children of Israel. He's talking to Moses. And you even started to say this earlier when you're talking about there becoming a kingdom, and then you corrected yourself and you're like, well, a nation, right? But the word kingdom, he uses that word and he describes them as a kingdom of priests, which is interesting because that's not normally how we think of it. Because we think of, go ahead.
Well, you normally think of a priest as somebody who's mediating to people who don't know God or who don't have access to God, somebody who's bringing God to people who don't have access. Yeah. So not only is Moses supposed to be like this leader bringing God to Israel, everybody in Israel is supposed to also bring God to the rest of the world.
Isn't that an incredible concept? He wants this whole nation to be priests to the rest of the world. So you see how he's wanting to fulfill what he said to Abraham, that in this nation, all the families of the earth will be blessed, right? But there's a condition to it. They're supposed to keep his covenant, right?
So their side of it is...
Right. They're supposed to obey his voice and keep his covenant. So this is going even back to the Garden of Eden where they did not obey his voice, right? So Adam and Eve were tasked with a kingly position. They have dominion, and they're supposed to take care of the creation that God's made. They don't obey his voice. That's what messes it all up in the first place. Now Israel's being tasked with being a holy nation, a set apart people that is to be a kingdom of priests. And he says, and I just want you to, the way you're going to do this, the way you're going to show people who I am and what kind of God I am, is you're going to obey me and keep my covenant. That's going to be what reveals to the rest of the world who I am. So Moses tells all the people are gathered there. He calls the elders and he tells them, look, this is what God said. And all the people answer together and they say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Okay. So
everybody's in.
Everybody's in. There's a given, there's a response, right? It's not like God's like, this is what I'm going to do, and you don't have a choice. It's like, here's what I want to do, and the people all respond, awesome, we'll do it. Everything that you've said, we're going to do. And they don't even know the specific terms of the covenant yet, right? They just know that the God who rescued us out of Egypt wants to make a covenant and wants us to obey him, and we're in.
On their side, God has provided his protection. He'll keep providing his protection, deliverance, just like he did with Egypt.
Yeah.
And he's going to use us to be to be a kingdom of priests. Yeah. We're going to have this awesome role, basically, mediating his or helping show his presence to everybody else. But in return, our side of is we have to continually listen to his voice, obey him to stay on mission, because we're not just kind of like the era of Adam and Eve. We can't seize rule for ourselves. Our authority is going to continually come from the source, the source of all authority, which is God. So basically, stay connected to the guy who's got the plan. Stay connected to it.
And it makes so much sense. When you just step back and think about it a little bit, the God who created everything, who created life, knows how life's supposed to operate, right? Who created humans, knows how they're supposed to operate. It makes sense to look to him for insight on how we should live, right? And how we should run this world,
Okay,
and
so there's this relationship. Everybody's in.
Yeah.
How does this relate to the tabernacle?
And
these symbols of separation, what?
Because at this point, the people respond, and I guess there's still a level of separation, because Moses hears from God, and comes and tells the people. But God wants to do something even bigger. Okay, so the Lord now speaks to Moses, and he says, "I'm going to come in a thick cloud, so that the people will hear when I speak with you, and they'll believe you forever." And so God right now he's using a messenger, right? He's using an intermediary. Moses is hearing from God and telling the people what God says, but God says, you know what we're going to do? I want the people to hear my voice themselves. I want them to hear my audible, tangible voice, so they know who I am, right? But he's going to come in a thick cloud, which is interesting. And so there's even a level of separation there, right? He's coming in a thick cloud. So there's an obscurity. When you think of a cloud, what does a cloud do? It hides the sun, you know what I'm saying? And so when you're driving through, so God's coming in a thick cloud. So there's still a separation between God and people because of humanity, because of sin. But he wants the people to hear his voice. So the way that this needs to happen, the people aren't just going to be able to walk right into the presence of God and hear his voice. He sets up some things that Moses is going to have to put in place. And so he tells Moses to tell the people to sanctify themselves, which means they're making themselves clean. They're getting themselves ready. They're washing their clothes, is something he explicitly mentioned there. And they're going to be ready. And on the third day, it says the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. So he says, in 3 days, I want you guys to get yourself ready, sanctify yourselves, make sure your minds are right, wash your clothes, get clean, get ready, because the Lord's going to come down and you're going to have an interaction with him in a way that really hasn't happened since the Garden of Eden, right? We're seeing this, the Lord is going to come down in the presence of the people in a unique way here. And he tells Moses to set bounds around the mountain. They're going to set a border. And he says, if anybody touches the mountain, they will be put to death. So don't let anybody touch it, whether a beast or a man, or they're not going to live. So there's a danger here, right? And you notice how the ante has been upped, because when Moses spoke with God on this mountain, it was in a burning bush. But now the whole mountain is going to be this holy place where God's presence is going to be. It's going to be a burning mountain, not just a burning bush now. Okay. All right. Are you still with me?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out, if God's making all this effort to get closer and closer and closer to his people and reveal more and more.
Yeah. Why the separations?
Why is the tabernacle a separation? Why are there all these rules around it? Why doesn't God just reveal himself it seems like he's doing? He's going to come down. Yeah. Everybody's going to hear his voice. Does that go wrong or something like that? Why is there a need for this tent where you encounter God God, it seems like God's not wanting to use a tent. He's wanting just to be like, here I am, everybody, all at once. Let's go.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
So that's
This, and I do think it seems like that's what he right. It's not, because if that's truly his goal, but I think it really has to do with, and this may be hard for me to explain fully. So maybe you can help me flesh it out. But I think in our humanity, and after the fall, right after the Garden of Eden, there is something broken in us that can't handle the full holy presence of God. And part of, you see that God, he says, I don't want them to take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. But later on, he's clearly, as you read through the New Testament and stuff, and Jesus talking about wanting to give us eternal life, that's clearly what he wants for us in the long run. But there was something that if Adam and Eve had taken of the tree of life and lived forever, would not be good in their current sinful human state, right? Once they had taken of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There was something that is, and we're going to see this several times as we go through, as you go through the Bible, you'll see people that approach to God in the wrong way, and they're burned up, or something happens to them. And I think it's really more of a fundamental separation in our natures, that in our human natures we really can't handle the presence of God in its fullness in the way we are now. He has to change us.
So if that's what happens, God's plan to come and like reveal himself in this huge, not just a bush that's on fire, like a whole mountain that's on fire. Does that plan not go well? Like you said, people can't handle.
Right. Well, at this point in the story, we know that there needs to be parameters, right? So we're waiting to see if it's going to go well. So there's a fence around. Yeah.
God's already kind of put, like, we're already getting hints that, like, the full whatever of God's presence already isn't quite what God's aiming for, because he's already kind of hedging his bets and like putting parameters, telling people get really ready, get really, really, really ready, like, and all this stuff is happening. What happens?
Okay. So he tells them, get ready, set this border. Moses goes down. He tells the people they're getting ready, and they they're not even coming at their wives. So read into that what it is. They're wanting to make sure that they're just completely focused on what's about to happen. And so the third day comes, right? The third day comes, and what they see on the mountain, the promise that they had is the Lord's going to come down in their side on the mountain. So what do they actually see when that happens? And it says that when on the third day in the morning, there are thunderings, there's lightnings, a thick cloud is on the mountain, and the voice of a trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people in the camp tremble. So they're waiting. So whatever they're expecting, this is what happens, right? And so imagine being there. Imagine being at the base of this mountain. This is the God that rescued you from Egypt, right? He toppled the mightiest empire, the Egyptians, that you know of on the face of the earth, right? And now he wants to speak to you. He says he wants to make a covenant with you. And thunder, lightning, thick cloud, and whatever this is, the sound of a trumpet. And it's so loud, and the people are shaking. They're in the trance. So this is scary, right? This is intense. And Moses, he brings the people out of the camp, it says. So they're all hiding in their tents or whatever. And he says, all right, let's gather up. And they meet with God, and they stand at the base of the mountain. And it says Mount Sinai is on a smoke. And it says it's on a smoke because the Lord descends on it in fire. And the smoke ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. So not only is there's like thunderstorm going on, but they see fire descending down on the mount. There's a smoke, and it looks like some kind of volcanic thing, and it's shaking. The whole mountain is shaking. And it says the voice of the trumpet sounded loud and waxed louder and louder. So in the midst of all of these other sounds, there's the sound of a trumpet that just keeps getting louder and louder. So this is crazy stuff, right? This is pretty intense. And Moses speaks, and God answers him by a voice. He comes down on Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and Moses climbs the mountain. So for some reason, Moses is able to go up onto this mountain, right, that the rest of the people are separated from. But he starts climbing up, and God's speaking to him. And he speaks to him. He says, hey, go make sure the people don't break through to try to look at the Lord, to try to get a closer look, because they will die. And he says, and even the ones, like the leaders that have sanctified themselves, tell them, just stay back, lest the Lord breaks forth upon them. There's something that's going to happen where they could die if they try to just burst past the fence and go up there. And Moses tells the Lord, and I love this part, he's like, they can't come up. We set the bounds just like you told us. You told us to set this boundary, so they can't come up. And God says, I want you to go down anyway. And in the King James says, away, get thee down, and come up with Aaron, your brother, but don't let the rest of the people come up to look at the Lord, lest he break forth on them. So Moses goes down, he tells the people, he's like, hey, God wants you to stay here. In this whole story, you'll see Moses gets a lot of exercise. He is quite the mountain climber. He's always going up and down. All right, so he goes down, and the people there, and I'm guessing maybe some of them were tempted. If I was there, I probably wouldn't have been tempted to run up on the mountain of fire and shaking and thunder and lightning and all that.
Like in Lord of the Rings, like you gotta just throw the one ring. Like,
this is like Mordor, It's like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And so then we the next chapter, and I love that the next chapter is Exodus 20, and it's really familiar to a lot of people. A lot of people have a large portion of it memorized because it's the 10 Commandments. But so often when we talk about the 10 Commandments, we don't talk about it in this context. So the way that the next chapter starts, God speaks, he starts speaking, and all the people are gathered there around this fenced off mountain that's quaking, and they hear the voice of God, and what he speaks to them is the 10 Commandments.
Okay. So everybody's getting these all at once.
Everyone hears it.
Okay. Got it.
I think a lot of like Sunday school or videos or whatever, like as a kid, at least, I always had the impression that Moses just went up, he got him from God, God wrote him down on the tables of stone, he came down and told the people. But in the Bible, they heard all the words of the 10 Commandments before he got them on the tables of stone. They heard the audible voice of God speaking these 10 words, 10 Commandments. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the commandments, but that's what he gives next. And it's the way he starts is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And so and basically these are the terms of the covenant, right? All right, God, you said that we need to obey you. We need to keep your covenant. So what does that entail? Well, here's what it entails. I don't want you having any other gods. I don't want you making graven images. Yeah, don't take my name in vain. Sabbath
don't kill
day,
people.
Honor your parents. Don't kill people. Commit adultery. Steal. I said I wouldn't go through them, and here I am. I went through. But so he gives them all this stuff. And as he finishes with the 10th commandment, the people, it says, they see the thunderings, the lightnings, the noise of the trumpet, the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So not only are they not running up to look at the Lord, but they're backing up, right? They're hearing this voice and they just keep getting further and further. So this is interesting. This is an interesting section because God was wanting to draw near to his people. He wants them to hear, right? So there's this dramatic display where he comes down and it's scary and he's speaking to them, but the people are moving further away, right? They're backing off of what's happening on the mountain. And they actually tell Moses, they're like, hey, we have a better idea. Why don't you speak to us, go up and talk to God like we were doing before, come back and tell us what he says. But we're scared to hear God speak because we're probably going to die. Like people's eardrums are bursting all over the place. I don't know. Like they're terrified of what's happening here. Okay. And so, go ahead.
No, I just said, okay.
Okay. So they say, Moses, why don't you go? And Moses says, don't be afraid. He says, fear not. The reason this is all happening, God is coming to prove you. He's coming to test you. He wants his fear to be before your face so that you don't sin. He wants you to realize, in other words, how powerful he is and how much you should respect him so that you don't veer off from his commandments. He's showing you part of his true character. And to the result that you're going to take this really seriously, right? You're not going to think that God is, and he's going to give some more insight about why God does this. But then the Lord speaks to Moses. Okay, I'm sorry. So then Moses tells the people this. The people stand afar off, and then Moses goes up. He draws near to the thick cloud where God is, it says. And God tells Moses, tell the children of Israel that they've seen how I've talked to them from heaven. So don't make any graven images. Like, don't think that I'm a cow or something, hypothetically speaking, right? Don't think that I don't want you to make graven images because you haven't seen any image. You've had a real encounter with the God of the universe, and you haven't seen any image that you can make of me. And that's part of the reason I did this, right? He says, I want you to be very clear about this. And then he says, all right, now Moses, make sure you tell them that. And then he says, and here's some judgments that I'm going to give you to tell the people on how they're going to operate their society. So for the next 3 chapters, he gives them these rules about this is how you're going to operate. And it has to do with like, it's like a bunch of civil laws. There's like social justice stuff in there. He's talking about how they're supposed to treat their slaves, how they're supposed to, not steal. And like, he gives details and punishments that might happen if so, and stuff like that. So he gives Moses these judgments. And this is all he's speaking to Moses now directly, but the people, they're at the base of the mountain bearing witness to this interaction. Okay. So what's happening? God's giving them this is your side of the covenant. These are the terms of the agreement. This is how you're going to reveal to the world who I am, is by operating in this way that I'm showing you right now.
Okay. So knowing what I do know about, scripture, and people, I'm assuming Israel doesn't follow the laws, just like Adam didn't follow the laws of God, just like Noah's family eventually devolved, and I'm assuming Israel doesn't follow the rules either, which I'm sure I'm assuming that's correct. Right. Okay.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
So I'm also thinking, maybe this isn't the point, because we're still trucking toward the tabernacle, right? What the point of this tabernacle is?
Right.
Right. Okay. I'm assuming.
Yeah. Whoever tuned in for a tabernacle study, they're like, what in the world?
Sure.
Just a recap.
No.
But yeah.
If this is all the foundation for understanding what the tabernacle is,
right.
and there's more lessons to come, this is totally fine. But I know when you said, some of the rules are like social justice stuff and how to treat their slaves, I think a lot of people are not going to hear anything you say after that and be like, slaves? But
slaves? That's not a godly society, right?
Right. Like, wasn't Israel slaves? What does God do? So maybe we don't have to have a discussion about it here. But
I can offer, just in case that's going to be a hang-up point for people, I can offer a couple quick things to clarify, because it is really cool. The basis of how they're supposed to interact with other people is, like he says several times, because remember, you were slaves in the land of Egypt, right?
Sure.
And I think our problem, like in our modern society, we're picturing like slaves as lifetime, people that are being treated as property, that are bought. They have no choice. They're out working in the cotton fields, right, being whipped, and we're thinking of that kind of slavery. And so the way that he starts off with these judgments, and of course the whole ancient world, slavery is just a common thing, right? That is how the world operates. But the Hebrew nation was supposed to be really different in how they handled this interaction, and the way that it's more of an indentured servant kind of thing, where somebody would get in, and we know this from other places in the Bible, but I'm just giving like an outline, but where they might get into really bad financial trouble and say, listen, I'll work for you for a certain amount of time to pay off this debt, right? And so the way that God puts a limit on even that. Okay,
so it's rules about how to treat people who are economically indebted to you, and are not permanently your property to.
Right.
Okay.
He goes out of his way to make the point that they are not your permanent property, because he says if you have a Hebrew servant, then he can serve you for 6 years, but you need to let him go in the 7th year. And so he puts a time limit on it. And of course, it's based off of the symbolism of God worked for 6 days and then rested on the 7th. They can work for you for 6 years, but that's as far as you can take it, unless that person who's working for you, that servant, says, no, I love my master, I want to stay with them. And God says that's an option too, if he wants to stay with you, and you would just mark his ear. And so we could go deeper into that, but they were supposed to put their ear and they get a hole bored through their ear as a mark that this is somebody who has chosen to stay and work with this master's family, right? So it's a little different than our concept of slavery. Like, does that make sense there?
Sure. And that's probably
there's
good
a limit, there's boundaries,
I guess, yeah, I think there's probably a lot deeper to go there, but I think
for sure.
God making this awesome covenant, and there's all this weird stuff happening. He's giving all these great rules, like, don't have other gods, don't kill people, honor your father and mother, keep the, right. And then in the middle, and treat your slaves well. And then you move on and you're like, wait, slaves? Did someone say slaves? Like, okay.
Yeah. Okay. But that's one of the amazing things about this covenant, because this is unlike people's perception of slavery, right? This is he's saying, he recognizes the situations that might cause somebody to be in that situation, but there's a huge value on human life here, that they're not going to just be working for you as your property for the rest of their life, unless they want to, but it's giving them an option in there,
Okay.
So, and there are things that we could go deeper into to say, because they'll use portions of scripture in the Old Testament law and say, well, this isn't really moral. And I think a lot of times it's just based off of a misunderstanding of it. But so that was an unfortunate choice of words that I just threw out the slavery thing when we don't have time to go like super deep into it, but we might have to do that. And
all right. So God gives
people watching, put in the comments if you want us to do a in-depth
right.
slavery
Exactly.
deal.
Exactly. So God calls Israel out, says, I'm going to initiate a covenant with you. Get ready. They all get ready. The day comes, God descends, gives them the 10 commandments, and then goes beyond, gives Moses a bunch of other laws beyond the 10 commandments that they need to follow. As I said, Israel doesn't follow them.
Okay, so we know that they don't, but at this point, I want us to forget that we know that they don't for a second, because the way it's being presented is like, all right, here's the plan. This is how I want this to look. This is how I want you to look as this peculiar treasure nation, Israel.
If you're going to be a nation of priests, you got to follow certain.
This is what because he says, I want you to obey my voice, and they already said, okay, yeah, we'll do it. And now he's saying, all right, so this is what I mean when I say I want you to obey my voice. These are some of the judgments. Here's 10 commandments that I'm speaking to everybody to hear. That's like the basis for this whole thing. And then here's like judgments, these more specific, like civic type things, or civic. What is the word? Anyways, this is how you're going to operate in your society, kind of deal. Okay. And some of it is kind of like really specific to their society, in the sense that this is an ancient nomadic people that's coming into a new land. And so you can tell that it's based off of the situation they were actually in. It's practical for them. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so he gives them these judgments, and then he tells Moses, and so this is in chapter 24. And I hardly hear anybody talk about this chapter, but this is, and chapter 25 is where he starts talking about the tabernacle. So we are closing in. We're almost there to the tabernacle itself.
I'll believe it when I see it. Let's keep going.
Yes. So now, but this I think is so crucial to our understanding of it, because he tells Moses, come up to the Lord, you, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, which are Aaron's sons, and 70 elders of the children of Israel, and worship afar off. Moses alone will come near the Lord, but they won't come nigh, and the people won't go up with him. Okay. So this is interesting because he's breaking the boundary with a select group of people, Aaron and his 2 sons and 70 of the elders. So these are like the representative leaders of the people that are going to come up on the mountain. Moses is going to be able to go further. So there's these 3 zones, which this is going to feed into our understanding of the tabernacle. There's the zone where all the people are on the other side of the border. And then there's the zone where there's a select group of people representing those people that are coming up further into the mountain. And then there's one person in Moses who's representing the people who's able to go even further. Okay. So there's a outer area, a more holy area, and then the holier area. Okay.
And by holy, and by holy,
like set apart. These are the areas that are set apart that some people aren't able to access, I guess. Okay.
So would you say distinct or privileged?
Distinct is a great
distinct
word.
And privileged, or distinct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good words. Well done. It's almost like you've taught on that before. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. So Moses tells the people this, all right, he comes and he tells them all the words of the Lord, all the judgments. So that's everything, if you're reading through that you just read in the last 3 chapters. And the people answer. So they've heard these judgments, right? And so now that they're hearing the judgments, like in our way of thinking, it's like, wait, I don't know about that one, let's talk, let's negotiate. But the way the people respond when they hear all the judgments is, all the words which the Lord had spoken, we will do. So the same thing they said before they knew what it was going to be, they've heard a more detailed version, and now they said, yeah, we're going to do it. They agree. Everything that he said, we're going to do. Moses writes it all down, and then this is the end of that first day where all this crazy stuff's happening. And so the next morning, he rises up, and he builds an altar under the hill. And we're going to talk more in depth about what an altar is all about later on. So I'm just going to drop that there. Okay. There's an altar, so there's this place where you sacrifice animals that Moses builds at the base of the mountain. Okay. And he puts up 12 pillars, and they offer burnt offerings, and they offer sacrifices to the Lord. Okay, so this is that next morning, and they're offering animal sacrifices. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions there, like what on
Yeah.
earth? Why are we
Right. What is going on here? So
why are we killing animals?
yeah, we're gonna in a future lesson, we're gonna back up and we're gonna look like super in depth into that.
Okay.
We're just establishing the storyline right now. So this is what happens next in the storyline. It may seem super crazy to you, but just bear with us, stick with us, and we're gonna keep going as we'll break it down. Get all your questions ready, and we'll talk more deeply about that. And so then, now this, if that weirded you out, this is going to super weird you out, but it's so good. Ready?
Okay.
So then Moses, he takes the blood from the animals that were sacrificed. They drain out the blood, and it's in basins. And he sprinkles half of it on this altar where they sacrifice the animals. And then and now I feel like I'm going to have to explain the sacrifices, but we're going long already. But I'm just gonna break it down here. So he sprinkles the blood on the altar. Then he takes the book of the covenant. So he wrote down all the words himself, like on a scroll, some kind of book, a papyrus.
All the stuff that God was saying.
Yep.
Both in the Ten Commandments and everything else. It's all in written form now. Okay.
Yeah, it's in written form. It's in a book form now. He takes that book of the covenant and he reads it. So he already came down and he told them what the Lord said. Now he reads it again in the audience of all the people, and for a third time, they say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Okay. Now, remember earlier we talked about this is a covenant. It's like a marriage. Okay. So this is like the ceremonial part of that, right? In a sense, because these are like the I do's. God says, I want to take you, Israel. I'm choosing you, Israel, out of all the other nations. Just like in a marriage, a man chooses a woman out of all the other women in the world, right? I'm going to focus on you. And of course, it's a little different because it's God and the people, but just like in the metaphor, I get what you're saying. Yeah, this is the ceremony. And now Moses has read all the words of the covenant. So he's read the vow, if you will. This is, for better or for worse. Richard for. This is what we're doing. And the people are saying, I do, or we do. They're like, yes, thumbs up. 2 thumbs up, God. We're going to do it. Okay, so there's a verbal, right?
Yeah.
What?
All of the thumbs we give them.
All the thumbs. All their thumbs are up in the air. That was a Hebrew thing. I don't know if you knew that. And they say all. So there's this verbal response. Everything he said, we're going to do it and we're going to be obedient. And then this is where it gets freaky, maybe. But Moses takes the other half of the blood that he didn't sprinkle on the altar, and he sprinkles it on the people. He's like, I don't know, dipping something in. And so people are being splattered with blood. So good. Such good stuff. And he says, behold, the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you concerning all these words. The blood of the covenant. Okay. So, and if you just want to look at it from I want to just like go crazy with it. But there is an implication with blood, right? That this is super serious. You think about like, no, there's like people. Well, as kids, we're gonna be blood brothers, and you like cut your thumb, and it's like that's really. Did you ever do that?
No,
you never did. I gotta confess, I didn't either. We were always too scared. We're just like, we'll just shake hands. But we're gonna
okay, so without going crazy into the weeds about why we need to sacrifice animals,
the
blood, like that's all obviously a huge part of the story. But for right now, all we need to know is it's
part of the ceremony, and it provives gravity.
It's an extremely serious symbol.
Yeah.
But and why it's
if you have blood being sprinkled on you, it's like, okay, so this is and it's connected with this idea that if you don't obey God, there's death, right? In the Garden of Eden, that was what he said. He says, if you do not take from this tree, because if you do, you'll die. Right? In the day you take from it, you will surely die. And so they're entering into this covenant again, and there's something that's associated with death, blood, right? That's sprinkled on them. And so we'll go deeper. But in the meantime, just be like, enter into another culture for a second and be like, all right, this is a weird ceremony. I'm watching this thing. I'm not quite sure everything that's going on, but they seem pretty into it, so that's where we're at.
Everybody's got blood all over them. All right, got it.
Everybody's got blood.
But they seem to be taking it really seriously, and nobody's grossed out. Everybody's taking it seriously.
Everybody's like, yes, I feel the blood and I know what's happening. Okay. The people are all on board with this.
I'll suspend
disbelief.
Yeah, suspend it for now. Let's keep marching on. It's the covenant ceremony. Everybody's got the terms of the covenant. It's been spoken to them. It's been read to them a bunch of times. So everybody's got it a couple times. Now they're doing the I do's, doing all the cool symbols to get it in their head.
Right. Yeah.
Now what?
All right, and in a Jewish wedding ceremony, kind of the breakdown, from what I understand, I'm not Jewish, and I don't think I've ever been to a Jewish wedding. But from what I understand, once the ceremony takes place, there's a meal. And then the couple will go off by themselves they'll go off into a special chamber, right, for 7 days, with the hope of conception. That's like kind of the baseline like philosophy behind the Jewish wedding ceremony. That's like there's a honeymoon period, I guess. And so if we're going off of that, like the next thing would be the meal, right? The meal with the people. They've made the covenant. They've said the I do's. That was the formal part. But then what happens next is Moses, Aaron, his sons, the 70 elders, they go up onto the mountain like God told them to. And verse 10 says they saw the God of Israel, which is a mind-blowing statement, even that right there. Because so far he's like, make sure nobody breaks in to look upon the Lord. So what did they see? What is it talking about? It doesn't explain. It says they see the God of Israel, and under his feet there's a paved work like sapphire stone. So he's on this like foundation platform type thing. There's this blue, platform or whatever that he's standing on, this sapphire stone, a foundation, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. And it says, upon the nobles of the children of Israel he did not lay his hand. Also they saw God, and they did eat and drink. So what's happening here? They come up into the presence of God, they don't die, and they have a meal. They like sit down and they just like start eating and drinking, and there's the presence of God, like a physical, something they can actually see, some kind of physical presence of God is there on this mountain, and they're able to be there. They're not dying. Like, this is glorious. This is what it should have been, in the Garden of Eden. They're there in the presence of God. He's walking with them in the cool of the day. The voice of the Lord is walking in the cool of the day, whatever that means. But they see something, and they're eating and drinking. They're having a meal. Okay, so there's fellowship with God. Are you tracking?
Yeah, I'm tracking with you.
All
right. I'm still trying to figure out how we get from here to the tabernacle. This tent.
Okay, all right. So this is good. Like,
if people, yeah. It sounds even more so like kind of what I said earlier. God's getting more and more intimate with his people.
Yes, absolutely.
But then you're telling me there's this tabernacle. You said there's a tent where there's all these symbols of separation.
Sure.
And so like I'm trying to figure out the trajectory seems to be God and his people are getting closer and closer. But then you're telling me in an extremely short period of time, because we're in chapter 24 of Exodus, and by chapter 25, something totally different is going on where there's like no tent, separation, all this stuff. Like So what? It seems
what
like
changes?
these are going in like way opposite directions. What happens?
Let's try to tie it together. So it's good. This is good. This is beautiful. And the next thing that's going to happen, the Lord tells Moses, I want you to come up further to me. Remember, he said, the people are going to stay. And now the mountain, right? They're not going to, this isn't their final destination. This is the place where he's going to make the covenant with them. But he promised Abraham back in the beginning that he was going to give him a certain land that his descendants were going to inhabit. And they still have to get to that land, right? So this isn't where they're staying, but this is the place where there's been a fence around the mountain. There's been all these things that have happened. The people have sanctified themselves. And so there's going to have to be some kind of change. If this is like the place where God's presence dwells, is this mountain, Mount Sinai. If they leave, do they have to keep coming back to the mountain? Like, how are they going to get back into the presence of God? Or is his presence somehow going to go with them? Is it somehow going to be there in that land? Is there going to be a new mountain that he chooses, right? That's the next question.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so the question becomes, if God's going to meet us so powerfully, is it tied to a spot?
Sure.
Like other religions, there's a pilgrimage you make to a spot. Or if we're supposed to be this kind of hot spot for the rest of the world that God's presence emanates out from us to the rest of the world,
right?
We have to tie ourselves down to a location, because if we leave,
right, that's the question.
Okay. So where is the hot spot of God? That is the source of our mission, basically.
Right. And there does, like, as you go through the through Genesis, you see that God's presence is so evident in the Garden of Eden. And what's interesting is it's not like God's like, all right, you guys messed up, and then he goes back up to heaven and the Garden of Eden just withers and dies. Oddly, he's there in the Garden of Eden and he has them leave. Like, why doesn't he just like, all right, this is not holy anymore, destroy it or whatever, For some reason they leave, and then there's a boundary, there's a cherubims and a flaming sword. Like, what's going on there? And another story that's odd, and in the ancient world, in their minds, there is something about geography, like certain locations, and and Abraham's grandson Jacob, he's traveling at one point, and he's on the run. He's by himself in the desert. He falls asleep, and he has a dream. And in his dream, there's a connection between heaven and earth. He sees a staircase or a ladder going up into heaven. He sees angels ascending and descending, and he sees God at the top, or he hears God at the top saying, "I'm going to make the same covenant with you that I made with Abraham." And he wakes up and he says, "Wow, the presence of God was in this place and I didn't know it." And then he builds an altar and he, pours oil on it. And so, there's this concept of like,
he's associating the presence of God with not a mindset, but with a place.
Right.
Like, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Which we've, in our modern world, we have and it's because of like the theology and the rest of the Bible, how it plays out. But we've moved so far from that concept that sometimes when we come back and we're like going back over the story, that we're like, okay, well, that's kind of weird, that because we know God's everywhere and what's the deal here? But I think the problem is, even though the presence of God, theoretically, like if we're going to assume that the modern definitions of how, his omnipresence stuff, that's true, there's still this separation between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, but sometimes it overlaps. And it overlapped in the Garden of Eden, where the spiritual realm was manifested in this physical place. And it's overlapping here where Yahweh is appearing on this mountain, and they're seeing something.
Yahweh is the name
of
God.
Lord.
Yeah.
That's like the Hebrew personal name of God. And so that where he's appearing on this mountain. See, it's good because I just throw out these words and you gotta stop me.
Keep going.
And so there's this overlap between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. There's something about the, and it's in this certain location. Okay. So, and I'm not making any like definitive points about it, but I'm just trying to get us into the mindset of the.
So going to the tabernacle, then Israelites they have an encounter with the presence of God, like Moses had, like Jacob had, like Adam had, and everybody's tying it to a spot. God. Yeah. It's not that God comes to me. It's that God comes here.
Right.
And I am here. So if I want God, I have to go here.
Okay. Right.
The tabernacle is a place. So the tabernacle isn't so much symbolizing separation, because even in the places where, like the mountain, there was still separation there too. The tabernacle is more a portable spot where you can meet God.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with all this. Okay. That's exactly where I'm going.
So,
yeah, because I think when we think of the tabernacle, that our initial, it's my own fault because I started us off thinking about the cherubims and the separation and stuff. But when we see the curtains and stuff, and we're like, oh, what's up with that? But the actual goal of the tabernacle, and we're going to see that here and I'm going to finish with a verse in chapter 25. But the goal is that God's presence can be with the people, that it's available in this spot. But the reason that these elders were able to come up on the mountain, there were certain things that were done initially, right? That allowed the people. So they come and there's this period of sanctification for all the people, right? They're washing their clothes. They're not coming at their wives. There's a period of time where they're getting ready. And then the third day God appears, but there's these boundaries around the mountain, right? It's still not total access. And then there's the covenants read, they agree to the covenant, blood is sprinkled, sacrifices are made. Like there's certain rituals that are happening. Then the elders come up and they eat with God and they drink with God. And then Moses is able to go up even further, right? So even with the mountain, it's not a full on complete access, but it like you said, you do see that trend of they're getting closer and closer, right? There's a way being made to where they can interact in some way.
So that's supposed to continue with this tabernacle. The same thing, like ultimately the goal is for everybody to get close to the presence of God. Yeah. But just like how there was the different zones on the mountain with this tent they make to be like the portable spot, there's different zones in there. Okay.
Yes.
And the point of why we need a portable spot where God can be is because they're not supposed to stay at the mount. If they're supposed to stay at Mount Sinai, you're already there. You're fine. God's there. We're here. Sweet.
Yeah.
God's saying, God is saying, okay, for you guys to be a nation to the rest of a priest to bless the rest of the world, I actually need you to not be physically here by Mount Sinai, so close to Egypt. I need you guys to go some miles further and to take this other land that's going to be your own land. Yeah. The land
and this land that's really at the crossroads of all these other nations in the ancient world. Like it's the center of all these other places.
So to fulfill their mission, to be a nation of priests the rest of the world, they have to go beyond Mount Sinai to a strategic spot
Right.
on the world, which happens to be the nation of Israel today, like that
Right.
land area. But they have to go to that strategic spot, and
Mhm.
that's at that point. They don't know what's going to happen there. Maybe there'll be another Mount Sinai, or who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah,
But like,
yeah. Yeah, at this point they don't know. But yeah,
okay,
yeah, exactly.
But on their way there to go find that new location, assuming God's going to be there waiting for them, but God says, "I'm going to go with you. You can have a little
Yeah.
portable location that can be brought with you as you're going there." But just like, all the seriousness that they had to conduct themselves with whenever they approached the mountain and the different zones, all that same seriousness is going to have to get taken with the tabernacle, because God is still powerful and he's still holy.
Right.
So all these instructions about how to build the tabernacle make a whole lot more sense, because it's just continuing. It's all instructions about how should you be thinking about making a space where the God of the universe is going to be right next to you.
Yeah.
How do you make a space for someone like that?
Yeah.
How do you prepare space for him? How do you prepare yourself to have that amongst you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all
Exactly.
these crazy rules, if you view it as boring, the real point you should be getting out of it is, wow, there's crazy levels of detail and a lot of seriousness and a lot of intentional foresight and planning that needs to go into encountering God. Like, this is not a casual thing.
Right.
Whether it's at a permanent location like a mountain that doesn't move, or a portable location that God has allowed us to move with us. Either way, God's holy, and there are rules and there are ways I need to conduct myself.
Yeah. If we place any value on encountering the presence of God, if we think that is important in any way, then this should be super important to us. Like if we think that would be a valuable thing in our lives, a beneficial thing.
So the specific rules that God gives to Israel for how to prepare the area for the tabernacle, or how to prepare the tabernacle, how to prepare themselves, how to prepare the area around the tabernacle, that may be kind of culturally specific, like you were saying, because it's geared towards a nomadic people. But the same principle we should take out of it would be, in our lives today, if there's going to be a spot where we encounter God, whether that's at a church, or whether God comes to meet us in our own minds, like in our own bodies, there should be extreme care taken to how we allow God to approach us and how we approach God, whether it's the same details that he gave to that nation back there, or it's a different set of details that he chooses to reveal to you. The point is that, like, encountering God is not something that's done casually, and it's something that's supposed to demand a lot from you. But in return, when you make that covenant with him, he will then use you and give to you this amazing mission. So is that a way to
exactly that's a great synopsis, because the whole what I want to talk about next time is why I think, because it could just be these are the details for them, and there's the different set of details for us, of like how we prepare.
And so that philosophy would be just look at them just for kind of as a reference. It's kind of historically interesting, but don't. And I think that's how a lot of people look at it. They're like, all right, well, none of this applies to me because there's not a tent, and they just let's get on to the New Testament. Glad to know they took it seriously. Good.
Yeah, but I actually think there's a pattern that's developed that is teaching us, and the same thing, there's a reason for everything that he put in place for them. And I think if we can get down to that reason, then it gives insight for us when we approach to God.
So it's not just, they took it seriously, they followed a lot of stuff, they were willing to sacrifice, and follow a lot of rules. So I need to be willing to follow a lot of rules and take it seriously. Like that's true, but there's deeper.
That's one level of it.
But that's the shallowest level. Deeper would be, why did he make those rules to begin with? Let's dig into those rules.
Like we were asking earlier, like, okay, they're sacrificing animals and sprinkling blood. Super weird. Why? Right. Okay. There has to be some principle behind why he's doing that.
And those principles, once we uncover them in future lessons, those are going to be very much alive to us today, I would assume.
Oh yeah. Well, I think so. I'm impacted all the time. When I started studying this, because I went through a study with a local group, and it's blown my mind how applicable the tabernacle is. And there's insights that I've gotten out of it that I've been able to apply in my daily life, and it's enriched my experience with God in a very real way. So I want other people to have that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Didn't mean to interrupt you. So as just an overview of this, then, man, tell me if I got this right. God creates man. There's a relationship there. Everything's working perfectly. Man falls away. God is trying to find a way to get man back, but can't just bring him back because something has changed inside man. So now there has to be a barrier. Okay.
Yeah.
So the whole rest of the story begins to kind of unfold. What's changed? God has stayed the same. He wants a relationship, but mankind has clearly got something wrong where he can't interact with God. And we see as the story progresses, mankind, as they have kids and make societies, the wrongness that's the bug in the coding becomes very apparent. Like, and people begin to sin and kill each other, and like things get crazy. God decides to put the hard reset on it to see if that will fix it. He saves one family, Noah's family, but decides to wipe everything out, try again. Apparently the problem is deeper than just eliminating, bad people. Apparently something really deep has gone wrong where even good people are going to go bad. Okay. So God says, okay, I'm going to have to change not just the people in the equation. I'm going to have to change the fundamental nature of mankind itself, like remaking mankind new, not just changing the characters, but changing the process of making characters. But if that makes sense, so go way deep into the source code of the people. All right, so then he says, to do that, I'm going to find one group of people, get them really right with me, and then use them to spread my blessings to the rest of the world. He calls one dude Abraham, same guy. Promises him, I'm going to make a covenant with you and all your family. Multiple generations go by. Throughout time, some of Abraham's descendants continue to encounter God, and they start to think, okay, God gets encountered in places, but there's not like a full fleshed out realization of the promise to Abraham yet. It's just kind of glimpses of what's still coming. Eventually, the family's big enough. They're enslaved in Egypt, but God sends a member of the family named Moses to come rescue them. And then once they've rescued them, he says, it's time. What I promised Abraham, I'm saying again to you. We're making a covenant. I'm going to use you as a kingdom of priests to spread my kingdom to the rest of the world. You're going to be a kingdom of priests to spread blessings to the rest of the world. And I'm going to be with you. Like, you're going to be helping me. I'm going to be helping you. Like, we're going to have this relationship again. It's not perfect. You're still got problems in you, but I'm going to start pulling us closer back to how mankind originally was in Eden. To do that, I'm going to expose my presence to you. There's going to be some boundaries, but you have access to come a little closer than you were before. You can get a little closer and we'll see what happens. And so they start getting closer and closer. Good. And he says, all right, you're getting closer and closer. Now let's take this show on the road. The mission is still on. We're going to start over here in this land called Israel. Let's go. You don't have to stay here at Mount Sinai where my presence is. I'll come with you in this little portable spot called a Tabernacle, which is like a tent where God says, I'll fall there. But all the seriousness, like everything still isn't fixed. You're not fixed yet. Like I haven't.
Right. Yeah.
As you're fixing the rest of the world, I'll be fixing you too. Like So everything's still not fixed yet. So all the seriousness that you took in approaching me at the mountain, you have to take that same amount of seriousness with the Tabernacle. And then you're telling me the principles, not just the specific rules of take it seriously, but the rules that God gave are very specific, and we can pull principles out of that for how we approach God today. And I'm assuming we'll also learn more about what happens with Israel, what happens when they get to the land of Israel and all that stuff, and how they follow or don't follow the covenant, right?
Yeah, good. That was an awesome synopsis. That's a great way. We're going to close out with that and with these, and because the fundamental principle that I want us to get out of this, right, is when God calls Moses up onto the mountain, he says, tell them to bring an offering, and he gives them all these materials, and the purpose is Exodus 25:8. He says, and let them. So even with that phrase, he's like, this is a privilege for them. This is an opportunity for them. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. That's his goal. He wants to dwell with the people, and he's allowing for this Mount Sinai experience to be transported into a tent, just like they live in tents. That's where they all live in right now. But he's going to be in a tent moving with them, right? But there's going to have to be some parameters. And just one, so like, because we were talking about the they say, Moses, why don't you just go up and talk to God for us and come back? And something interesting that God says, it's in Deuteronomy when Moses is recounting this story, but he tells about how you guys remember how God appeared to you and it was this whole crazy deal. And he says, but you told me to go and tell God that I'm going to, just to have Moses deliver the message to us. And he reveals something that God says that we don't see in Exodus. And God says, what the people said is right. They can't handle my presence. That's too much for them. He says, the way it says it is like, oh, that there were a heart in them that they would fear me. And so you see that even there, God's desire, he's like, all right, they're correct. Like, this is the way it's going to have to be for now.
They're
But
not
my
ready.
ultimate desire is to change that deep coding. If only they had that kind of heart that they really could handle it.
So, and that seems like a foreshadowing to things
Yeah.
that are going to happen later. If only something could get fixed deep
Yes.
inside. Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems like a good place to end
That's
it.
a great place to stop. I know I don't even know how long we went, so we're probably like way over. We may have to, but I appreciate you taking the time like to go through the conversation. I wanted to get it into the storyline so that we know
Perfect.
what's coming.
I think it was a great overview. I appreciate you taking time to explain it all to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan, and we'll pick up again next week.
All right. See ya.